Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Art Shell is universally recognized as the first African-American head coach in NFL history. He took over the Los Angeles Raiders in 1989 for 6 seasons, and he served a second stint as the Oakland Raiders head coach in 2006. Several have followed in his footsteps, including the likes of Tony Dungy, Herm Edwards, and Mike Tomlin, to name a few. But the true first African-American head coach in NFL history was actually Fritz Pollard. And next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we'll examine the unique football life of this Hall of Fame icon, Fritz Pollard.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 139, Fritz Pollard. Now, I'm recording this unique episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes on the eve of the 2024 NFL season. By the time you listen, it will be underway. And as my guest, Dr. Charles Ross, professor of history and African American studies at Ole Miss, points out, Fritz Pollard would be pleasantly surprised that two black quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, led their teams into battle against each other. Not something I think he could have envisioned way back when. Also, as Dr. Ross points out, there are so many black quarterbacks in the NFL today, again, something that Pollard might never have even dreamed about. Pollard coached the Akron Pros of the American Professional Football Association, which would shortly rebrand itself as the NFL. He coached them to the 1920 APFA Championship with a record of 8 wins, no losses, and 3 ties. By doing so, he became the first ever African-American head coach in NFL history. Art Shell, you might say, well, he was the first African-American head coach in modern NFL history. So, who was Fritz Pollard, and why don't we hear more about him, especially considering his historic standing? That's an awesome question, and one that I'm not sure can be answered. I don't want to say him being the first African-American coach has been brushed under the rug, but it's not something that is spoken about very often. He was also a terrific tailback who scored 16 touchdowns and caught passes for 2 more during the course of his career. On this episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes, we'll talk about Pollard's rise to being an NFL coach, the challenges he faced, and a whole lot more with my guest, Dr. Charles Ross. Before we do, please follow, rate, and review Sports Forgotten Heroes wherever you can. Follow on X and Facebook, and please spread the word about Sports Forgotten Heroes to your family, friends, and coworkers. And hey, if you want to reach out, please send me an email. Hit me up at warren@sportsfh.com. Okay, let's get into today's show about the first ever African-American head coach in the NFL, Fritz Pollard. Dr. Ross, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. So glad you can jump aboard.
Appreciate it. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Absolutely. Me too. I mean, it's a terrific topic. Fritz Pollard, such a historic name when it comes to the National Football League. And Yeah, just a lot to cover. And what I'd like to do is start off with this, just a little bit of background on Fritz Pollard. Who was he, and what is his significance when we talk about the history of professional football?
Wow. Well, I would, introduce him as the first African American to actually coach in the National Football League prior to what's called the modern era, before Art Shell. He's African American who part of this first kind of generation of individuals that are born right after slavery, 1894 or so. Came from a very athletic family. His father was a boxer, had brothers that played football, various sports. Eventually, he gets to Brown University, gets some help from John D. Rockefeller. He tried to get in a couple other universities prior to that, had to work on his grades. Gets to Brown, and again, he makes history. He plays running back. He's only 5'5", about 150 pounds. Tremendous amount of heart. First African-American to play in the Rose Bowl, plays against Washington State, 1916. They get beat in the game. If he were probably here, he would describe probably that the rain and the field just turned into a real mud puddle where he couldn't really get a lot of traction. And that may have helped them beat Brown. His next year, 1916, meets one of his closest friends in Paul Robeson, outstanding player for Rutgers, about 6'2", 200 pounds. So they're entirely too contrasting in terms of stature, but very, very, very close. And Brown plays Ian. They play against each other. And eventually, they ended up playing on the Akron Pros in 1920 and end up winning the NFL championship. Pollard co-coaches the team, and he plays in the NFL for several years. NFL becomes the NFL in 1922. Initially, it was called the American Professional Football Association. And Pollard plays in the league. And then what begins to happen is when Red Grange enters the NFL in 1925, just gradually black players began to be kind of meticulously pushed out of the NFL. Pollard has real issues with what he sees is going on. He retires in 1926. He places the blame of that process on George Halas and others, but he also tries to do something about it. He creates an all-black football team, the Brown Bombers, based out of Dykeman Field, out of Harlem. He puts this all-star team together, and he really tries to get the NFL to play this all-star team, these outstanding players from teams college teams that had played relatively well in college, and he's not very successful in getting that to happen. And eventually, of course, the color barrier comes down in the NFL after the 1933 season, and Pollard is really bitter because he feels like the NFL used him as a kind of drawing card token when they were trying to get themselves stabilized as a functioning organization during this time period. And once they reorganized in 1933, have an East and West division, have a championship game, don't have as many teams basically coming and going, he feels like many of the owners decide, well, we don't need these black players anymore. Let's try to make a go of what we're doing. The depression is raging. Baseball's all white, and so he really has a kind of a bitterness about his kind of experience. But he's a significant contributor nonetheless.
Yeah, you really covered a lot there. A great synopsis, but let's dive in a little deeper. Um, where did he first learn and develop his skills in football?
Well, according to an interview that's in several works, he makes the argument that his brother helped him to get on the team when he's like high school or so. He's like maybe ninth grade. He's got a brother that's a senior. I believe maybe Leslie. And you know, he's such an outstanding player that he's adamant that he won't continue to play unless his younger brother Fritz is allowed to be on the team. So he's the youngest of this family that is very athletic. And, you know, in many cases, the youngest, you got to survive. Either you cry and you figure out that, listen, they're not going to take it easy on me. They're going to be tough on me. And so you just going to have to dig down and find somewhere in your stomach to put iron on iron. And I think that's basically what happened because very, very, very small individual. And but the toughness. And again, I think people need to be well aware that, you know, this whole concept of personal foul in football that we have today and flags and crossing the line and play continuing after the whistle, you know, all those things were done. People getting kicked, punched. And so he was very adamant that he did not lay out on the field. He continued to just be tough and meet the expectations.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I'm the older brother, and yeah, I guess I can understand what Fritz went through as the younger brother because I sort of did it to my younger brother.
I did too. I'm the older of two brothers in the house, and so yeah, you can relate to that. You can relate.
Yeah. So you did take us through this big synopsis of his career, but what were, as he was entering college and entering at that time the APFA, American Professional Football Association, what were some of the challenges that he faced as an African American athlete in the early 20th century? Was the racism that rampant at that time as it shortly became thereafter as the 1920s and early 1930s progressed?
Well, without a doubt, it was because many people don't know that African Americans have a very interesting kind of history in sports, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th century. There's limited participation in horse racing. Isaac Murphy, outstanding jockey. You have individuals participating in bicycle riding, even in baseball in the late 19th century. And so in 1896, of course, the Plessy decision comes down and in essence makes segregation legal in America. And once that decision is handed down, you begin to see in horse racing, you have to have a license that's issued by the Jockey Club, and systematically and very quickly over the next 10, 15, 20 years, African Americans are pushed out of horse racing, pushed out of bicycle riding, they're pushed out of baseball. And so Pollard comes right when this curtain is coming down. He's struggling to get into Brown economically, and the Rockefellers really help him supplement and which allows him to actually get into college. But he also references that as the lone African American on the field, the number of racial epitaphs that he has to kind of deal with and the punishment, and then the crowd in terms of the yelling and are basically egging the opposing team to try to get this person, off the field and do everything you can to intimidate him. I don't know how he was able to do this. In some ways, he's a kind of Jack Johnson, from the perspective that, Jack Johnson plants a flag in soil where, as a first African-American heavyweight champion of the world, goes to the beat of his own drum, becomes champion in 1908. He has this historic fight in 1910 against Jim Jeffries, where everyone is just anticipating that this great white hope is going to now put this individual in his place, and African Americans are not going to have this kind of role model anymore. And that fight in itself facilitates race riots all across the United States when Johnson wins. So that's the backdrop of what's going on in the country during this time period. And you have to give Pollard a lot of credit. It's really difficult probably to put yourself in that place because the world is so much different now.
Yeah.
But in terms of opportunity, and here we're getting ready to we're 24 hours from the NFL kicking off tomorrow. And they're going to have two African Americans playing quarterback in the first game of the season. Lamar Jackson, of course, Patrick Mahomes, Ravens and Chiefs. And so, this is really appropriate because what would Pollard say if he could sit in the stands and watch this game take place and a number of African Americans on the field? Probably NFL is now about 70%. And a lot of it is just, people, I was talking to my class today and I said, you would like to think that on these 53-man rosters and all these individuals that are getting this opportunity, individuals like Pollard, if you ask up and down these rosters, do you know who Fritz Pollard is? You'd like to think you'd get an affirmative from the majority of these individuals that 60, 70 years ago would not have this kind of opportunity.
Yeah, and I'm not sure many of them do know who Fritz Pollard is. He's not a name. He's not a Jackie Robinson name.
No.
And thus the reason I'm doing this podcast. Growing up, how did his upbringing and education help shape his approach to football and leadership? Did it?
Well, I don't think there's any question. I think that, he had a role model in his father who was this outstanding athlete, a great boxer during the Civil War. His brothers were outstanding athletes. You look at what he did with his life after football. He coached.
Heck of a businessman. I mean, he had
great businessman.
Yeah.
Served in the military briefly. He checks a lot of boxes when you start talking about leadership. Very, very cognizant of being a role model, being involved with young people's lives, family, very stable. And I think all of that was taking place in the suburb of Chicago when they were growing up. And there were clearly some values that were being instilled that there are barriers in society. Education is crucial as a tool to maybe allow you to maneuver and manipulate and begin to chip away at those barriers. Once you begin to do those things, be cognizant of who you are and continue to reach back and try to help people. When you look at his overall career and, education, to be able to go to Brown University and play football in 1915 was a phenomenal experience. He had an opportunity to meet a number of people, to be able to be connected with John D. Rockefeller and the Rockefeller family, to be able to be willing to say, hey, we saw him, he's an outstanding athlete. We're going to try to support him. We know his family. It's a phenomenal story. In a lot of ways, it's a story really, you'd like to see maybe one of these networks, ESPN, Hulu, HBO or some studio out in California,
His life story.
bring his story to life in the big screen, because it's very inspirational, and it would be wonderful to get young people to have this opportunity to see what America was like during that time period and how he functioned and things that he was able to accomplish.
Going back, tell us about his relationship with John D. Rockefeller. How did that come about? How did the two meet? Why did John D. Rockefeller care about Fritz Pollard?
Well, from my understanding, he was able to see him early on before he got to Brown, because he tries to play at Northwestern. He tries to play at Harvard. He plays a couple of games. He may have even at Dartmouth. He may have even played one game at Dartmouth. He didn't have his grades. He had to have some prerequisites that he needed to finish coming out of high school. And he kept trying to slip underneath the radar and play for these individual institutions without actually finishing what he needed to do academically. And I think he was, they clearly knew the Pollard name because his brothers had already kind of planted a flag. And I think Rockefeller decided that, somehow they were introduced and they had conversation, and Rockefeller felt like he was worth it once he went back. And I think Rockefeller was able to kind of convince him and other friends that you got to go back and finish these prerequisites. And if you do that, we're going to find a way and make a way for you to be able to get to Brown. John D. Rockefeller, of course, very passionate about Brown. And, he gets him into school. And one of the bad things about Pollard that he would admit was that, he became an All-American and he didn't finish really doing the things he needed to do academically because he had to go around and make speeches and, go on the circuit and have dinners. And he probably got a little kind of big-headed because, here he's got this notoriety, really hadn't had it. People slapping him on the back, knowing who he is, introducing him, having him speak. That can get to anybody. But beyond that, really what he did throughout that whole experience was extremely positive.
So he goes to Brown University. He is the first African American to play in the Rose Bowl. He does so as you alluded to back in 1916. They lose to Washington State. Brown does 14-0. He rushes for 47 yards on 13 carries. Ultimately, he's going to become a coach in the NFL, the first African American coach in the NFL. But between Brown University and the NFL, there was another stop, Lincoln University. Now, I don't think that that's a school at the tip of our tongues. Not too many people can tell you about Lincoln University. But he goes there, he coaches there, and in his 3 years, they didn't play 13, 14 games a year like they do today. In his 3 years there, they went 10-2-1, and they won what was then called the Colored Intercollegiate Athletic Association in 1918 and in 1919. But his relationship with the staff at Lincoln University, I don't want to say it was contentious, but it wasn't great. Can you tell us why they didn't give Fritz what he needed, like travel to another place, another school to play? Sometimes he had to reach into his own pocket to help. What was the relationship like there between Pollard, the football team, and Lincoln University?
Well, you made a great point. You got some great details, a little bit more few details than I have. My general perspective was that, and I don't want to necessarily speak for Pollard, but if I had to guess and make a kind of educated, calculated assumption that here he's coming out of Brown, and even though he's had to deal with, as he would say, when he got out there to the Rose Bowl, he had to dress in a cigar store or cigar closet, and he finally was able to, there was all of this trepidation about whether or not they was even going to let him play. They finally let him play because there was initially some pushback about, officials, whether they were going to actually let him play. So we had to fight against all the segregation. But there were certain kind of basic things that he was able to do, traveling by train, those kind of functional things that a college football team was able to enjoy during that time period. To come to Lincoln University, a historically black school, where probably budget is going to be a major problem. And Pollard, it always kind of strikes me as someone, he's not the kind of person for them to approach and for him to just say, okay, I'm going to just go along with the fact that you can't get these things done. No, he always, to me, feels like someone that says he's going to be just the opposite. Hey, we got to figure out a way to get this done. Let's stop making excuses. Hey, I've had to struggle to get to college. I had to struggle even while I was in college. I've had to struggle to play football. And now you folk are trying to tell us, that these young men cannot be supported. Have you tried everything? Have you reached out to alumni? Have you reached out to other people in the community or connected to the community that potentially could give you donations? Have you done everything that's possible to make this happen? Hey, this is not a team that's losing. This team is winning. Let's try to support this team. Let's rally. Let's get behind this team. I'm spending a lot of time, energy, and effort. Probably doesn't have much in terms of a staff. And so he's investing a lot of time, energy, and effort. He wants that to be reciprocated. And to be honest, he's coming from an experience where he really had not been in a historically black school kind of community and environment where there are going to be some real limitations. So, I think that, there clearly had to be friction because he's pushing and saying, hey, let's figure out a way to get this done. And then probably administration and people in power are saying, well, we didn't necessarily expect for you to be this successful. We appreciate what you've done. These young men have had a great experience. They're here to go to college. And so that's probably where the rub was there. And, and just thinking of Pollard's kind of makeup, his tolerance for just kind of being mediocre, he was not kind of, that wasn't a part of his DNA.
How did Fritz's coaching career at Lincoln and his days at Brown University influence his style, his coaching acumen with the Akron Pros?
Well, I think they were very aggressive offensively. I think that he had a team with a lot of talent. I think that he was an individual that lacked no ability to motivate men. And I think this kind of reading about Paul Robeson, it's very interesting, this contrast in these two human beings, in that you have one that is relatively small in stature, but pretty vocal and very opinionated, and no hesitation about freely expressing that opinion. You got the other individual who's very large, really in a lot of ways is more blessed as a singer and actor, is playing football because going to law school, and then people are telling him, what are you going to do with this law degree? And because of his physical ability, is playing the game, but probably is not quite as passionate as Pollard. And so I think that it works together in a way in which probably there are a number of other kind of individuals on the pros that have similar kind of personalities and characteristics like Robeson. And, you know, Pollard is someone that, again, I think because he's had to be so small for so long in such a physical game that he has such determination and such confidence and such focus that those attributes make it easy for him in his mind to try to articulate those things and to instill those things in the individuals around him. He's a leader. Robeson is not necessarily a kind of natural leader. He walks in, he's huge, but here the little person is, he's got more to say, got more confidence. And so I think that is one of the key kind of attributes that helps him be the coach and really the kind of individual that is facilitating the leadership, play calling, and everything else that went into the success of that team in 1920. Think about it. All these individuals, and Pollard is the one that is the co-coach.
But how does he become? How does he become that? He's Fritz Pollard. He's an African American. He's not white. And he becomes co-coach of this team, the Akron Pros. And by the way, they're a heck of a team. They go 8-1 and win the APFA Championship. What can you tell us about that team and how or why Pollard does become co-coach?
Well, football's a little bit different during this time period. And so this idea that he's the coach doesn't have as much power as the coach kind of has today, where he roams the sideline. Coach has to sit on the bench, stay in kind of one kind of location, call plays from the bench. And so, and even the quarterback is the individual that's kind of calling out the cadence and when the ball is going to be hiked. The most talented, supposedly, during this time period player is a left halfback. The ball is hiked pretty much back to that individual. That individual can run, that individual can throw, and that individual can punt or kick or whatever needs to happen during that time period. So I do think that because of the way football is being played during this time period, it is more acceptable in that you have another individual, and so the duties are kind of divided, and it's not as though he has all of this kind of power himself to make kind of these significant decisions, because you're right. That would be a really, really astonishing thing to see if he was able to pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be easy back then to be a player and a coach at the same time. I know there were other guys that did it. It's not an easy role. And the sport where you saw most of that was baseball, and that was never an easy role there either. How come he only did it for 1 year? Why only 1 year was he co-coach or coach of the Akron Pros?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I know 21, 22, they're not quite as successful. They're making this transition. The NFL is making this transition, going from the American Professional Football Association to now eventually he's going to become the NFL during that two-year period. That's a great question. Maybe I'll throw that back to you. Maybe you can educate me, but I'm not sure why it was only just for the 1 year.
Well, he did go on and coach several other clubs.
Yes.
Over the course of his career, especially later, as you said, when he put together an all African-American team that played exhibitions and all of that. Were there any particular challenges that Fritz faced as a coach, particularly in the context of racial barriers?
Oh, I don't know if I have any recollection of anything specific in relationship to, say, a game, individual player, location, fans. From what I've read, that was almost kind of like the grass. That was almost like trying to score a touchdown. That was almost like having to put your uniform on. That those were just some constant variables, and whether or not something stood out more so than anything else in terms of resistance, I can't say that there's anything that he necessarily pointed to that was more difficult than something else.
Sidetrack for a moment here. You talked about this, and this is obviously the biggest deal, ultimately the removal, the banning of African Americans in the National Football League. I also did a podcast on Duke Slater, who played for the University of Iowa,
Yes,
and then with the Rock Island team in the NFL and the Chicago Cardinals. So there were minorities in professional football, but then they were banned. And I use that term loosely.
yes.
How did that all come about? Why and when? 1926 is my understanding of when Fritz was removed from or banned from the game along with other African Americans. I think there might have been a sprinkling here and there afterwards, but really after about 1933-34 until the 1960s, there were no African Americans in professional football in the National Football League. How and why did that all come about?
Well, that's a very interesting process, and I've looked at it in depth. And
Probably could do a whole show on that.
there's no doubt about that. That's a whole show. Like you said, Slater plays like 31, 32. Now, what is really fascinating, and if I had the ability and the energy to devote to going and doing another book and doing research, I would look at Joe Lillard. Joe Lillard is a fascinating individual because he plays for Oregon in 31 or so. Actually, 31. He's kicked out of school because they discovered that he was being paid to play on a Negro League team. He said that he told the NCAA, "Well, I just drove the bus, and I would fill in here and there when they were short on players, but they never paid me." He also played professional basketball, and he's going to play with the Chicago Cardinals in 32 and 33. And he is not Jackie Robinson. He is not Fritz Pollard. He responds on the field. And the coach basically feels like he just has too much attitude. He misses assignments. He comes late. He goes to the beat of his own drum. But, for example, they have a game where they play the Chicago Bears, he scores basically all the points in the game. They lose the game like 9-6, and they're going up against Red Grange. But, he's someone that, and then he plays on the Brown Bombers. He plays in the Negro Leagues a little bit here and there for other teams. He plays pro basketball, and he's from the West Coast. And he's just a fascinating character in this whole time period. to get out of that rabbit hole, in essence, in 1933, they have an NFL owners meeting. And at this meeting, there's nothing in writing. I've been at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. There really appears to be suggestions and discussions of a gentleman's agreement, and that is facilitated particularly by George Preston Marshall, owner of the Washington Redskins. It's got to go by George Halas, and it does. Mr. Rooney goes along with it, that owns the Pittsburgh club, and also Mr. Mara, who owns the Giants. And there seems to be distant understanding, even though they had potentially offered a contract to Slater in 34. He didn't sign the contract. He doesn't join. He doesn't come back and play on Pittsburgh's team. But what makes that credible is that you got Ozzie Simmons, you got Kenny Washington, you got Jackie Robinson, you got all these people coming out of college that clearly need to be drafted and put on these NFL teams, and they're not. And there's all of this response that, well, we're just trying to find, people that we think can make our team. Jackie Robinson in 1941 does a phenomenal job against the Chicago Bears in this all-star game that they play after the season, after the world champion plays a team made up of these all-stars, college all-stars. Jackie Robinson was averaging 12 yards a carry at UCLA. They don't sign him. And they don't sign Kenny Washington. 1939, George Halas supposedly tells Kenny Washington, hey, wait around Chicago, a couple of days, stay in a hotel. I'm going to get back with you. And it's almost like he talks to these other owners about, hey, I want to sign Kenny Washington. What do you think? They say no, which is kind of surprising because, hell, you started the league. Why are you going and asking these other guys? But that's how powerful this was. And I think that they didn't want to go against the grain. They were just now stabilizing their sport. They had a championship game. You've got the Depression. And baseball is all white. Baseball is the premier sport in America during this time period. Who are they to now jump in front of baseball? And I think that it's no accident when Branch Rickey decides to go on ahead and sign Jackie Robinson in 1945, and then the war ends, and a new league is formed. All of those things come together in a confluence in which the Browns now bring on, of course, Marion Motley and Bill Willis, and then subsequently the Rams have to capitulate with sports writers saying, "Hey, we're gonna figure out a way to march and protest and have black folk, and you guys aren't gonna be able to use this LA Coliseum unless you bring on some black players." And they agree to do that, and they bring on, of course, Woody Strode and Kenny Washington, and things just roll from there. So it's a great point, and I'm glad that it eventually happened. And it begins to fundamentally change because in a lot of ways, those two sports are the two major sports. Jackie Robinson comes 1 year later in 47, and everybody's looking at Robinson. But the NFL was the first of the major sports in this country to plant that flag. They got to be given credit for that.
Yeah. Back to Fritz. When he was playing, how did his presence in the NFL influence perception of African-American athletes and coaches at that time, or did it? Was there anything there?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm saying it was something there because he wasn't there for a cup of coffee. When you're in the NFL, 1919, about 1926, I think that his accomplishments at the college level basically let individuals know that this is a person that needs to be given credit for significant amount of athletic ability. And I do think that he was able to open some doors for other individuals. You know, who knows what the Cardinals were thinking when they decided to bring on Lillard. Is he potentially someone like Fritz Pollard in terms of it, in the backfield? And so maybe that had some effect on and perceptions of individuals and how they looked at African Americans in total.
In terms of being a player and being a coach, were there any specific innovations or strategies that Fritz introduced to the game of football?
Ooh, that's another great question. I don't know if I have the answer. I know that when he was coaching the Brown Bombers, they had a formation that they used. This formation he called the aeroplane. He felt like it was a formation that caused a lot of confusion for the opposing team. Whether or not he was able to have something like that being used earlier, I'm not so sure, because he has control of the Brown Bombers, and he, in essence, is the one that is doing all the scheduling. He's doing all of the coaching. He's a PR person. He's organizing games. And I think he's keeping up kind of optimism among those players that maybe something's going to happen during this time period, which it never does. But he also is someone that is a kind of strategist. So that's a great question. Whether or not he has something specifically that he was using while he was in the NFL, I'm not so sure about that.
Well, I mean, his career, for the amount of time that he played, was certainly filled with great accomplishments. He rushed for 16 touchdowns, as far as I could tell. He caught for 2 touchdowns. He was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the College Football Hall of Fame, the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame. Played for Akron, as we said, played for Hammond, was a first-team All-Pro, consensus All-American back in college, coached several teams, Lincoln, Akron, Hammond, a team called the Chicago Blackhawks, from what I understand. So he certainly made his mark as a player and a coach. What metrics, or how do you measure his accomplishments as a coach? And the reason I go to coach is because I think that's what makes Fritz Fritz. He was the first African American coach in the history of the National Football League. So how do we measure his accomplishments as a coach?
Well, I think you just laid it out. I think that, he's very, very, very successful. The teams that he led were very successful on the field. And the one thing that was somewhat maybe kind of frustrating was, and I'm glad you alluded to that, was that he was finally inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, because
and it took a really long time.
Yes, it was.
Really long time.
Listen, it was. I'd go up there to Canton and talk to some of the powers that be and doing research, and you got individuals that are contributors, and they're in the Hall of Fame, and I wasn't sure whether it was actually going to ever happen, and it would have been nice to do it while he was still alive. I just think that there was such kind of acrimony still bubbling between him and George Halas. And Halas had, such political power over the game that no one wanted to kind of, and he lived a long time, and no one wanted to try to cross. Who knows what Pollard's going to say while he's standing there at the podium if he's given this opportunity to be inducted. But it would have been nice for him to have that opportunity. His sons, I know, was pushing and was able to finally get him inducted, and a number of individuals like myself and other people that were connected in a number of ways have been pushing. And so to see that he's finally there is great.
Dr. Ross, there are so many different players in football that, African-American football players from way back when that were the first to do certain things. You mentioned Kenny Washington, Marion Motley. I talked about Duke Slater. But Fritz Pollard, where does your personal interest stem from in Fritz Pollard?
My interest stems from when I was in graduate school and I was thinking about a dissertation topic. And I sat there with my advisor and we were going round and round. He asked me the question that I kind of talked about or alluded to in a certain way a few minutes ago. Who was the first black professional football player? And I said, damn, I don't know. I played high school football. I love football. I've been watching it. I'm a diehard Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I can name all of these players from the Steel Curtain. And I finally found out it was a man named Charles Follis who was compensated in 1904 up in Shelby, Ohio, Shelby Blues, and played only a couple of years, injuries. But then I found out there was this other history where right before this NFL is finally organized and right after, you've got this group of individuals who are just coming in and just grinding and trying to just find a way. And of all of those people, the smallest cat is the toughest and the most focused. And in a lot of ways, the individual who does a lot to carry this flag and really never gets to a point, it's almost like his playing career. He never loses hope. And that's amazing. I mean, how he continues to have hope and he feels like, as Frederick Douglass says, without struggle, there can be no progress. And so he just absorbs that. It's not going to be easy. It hadn't been easy, and we got to just keep grinding on it. And I just, had an opportunity. I read John Carroll's biography of him, did a phenomenal job of looking at his life. And I was able to find footage, see some interviews. And he was just someone that was very witty and looked a little bit like Sammy Davis Jr. But, someone that, you'd like to take the field with. Just again, the determination during this time period when it's very, very easy to get to a point to where you say, hey, I can't change these circumstances. I can't change this country. I can't change what's going on in this game. But he just kept pushing the envelope, and pushing the envelope. And, you just gotta have a certain amount of respect and curiosity in terms of what's making him tick, and just appreciation and thankfulness that he did have the kind of things in his intestine that kept him going.
Two-part question to end our conversation. How do you think, your opinion, historians and football analysts today view Fritz Pollard's contributions to the sport? And second part, what lasting impact did Pollard have on the development of the NFL and professional football?
Well, I think that individuals that think of Pollard that are historians and maybe lay people kind of are dismissive because of what he accomplished. Because when you say the first individual to coach in the NFL, it's always Art Shell. And Art Shell's the first in the modern era. And what Art Shell did with the Raiders, no doubt, it took a long time for him to get that opportunity. He was rock solid. And he opened the doors up for other African Americans to be head coaches during the modern era. But again, when you look at what Pollard was able to accomplish during the time period, don't just sweep under mention Pollard in a way in which you say Art Shell in the modern era, but Pollard coached 2 years in what was the pre-NFL. Give him those accolades. In terms of his legacy, I think his legacy is going to be seen tomorrow night in terms of seeing two African Americans at the quarterback position. Somewhere I read, I believe that this season, out of like 30 teams, there may be either 15 to 17 African Americans that are going to start at the quarterback position. And
not too long ago, it was only Warren Moon.
Let me tell you something. No, even far back than that. When I was growing up,
James
Harris. We were just infatuated with James Harris.
James Harris.
I mean, there was nothing. It was a desert. And when he came out there with the Rams, first of all, it was hard to see him because they were the Rams and they came on, and great if they brought them on at all. And you'd see them, and sometimes they'd have solid teams, and he was someone that you really kind of said, wow, really appreciate, look at this guy. Could I maybe play quarterback like him? And, the next person was Doug Williams. Doug Williams was just outstanding. But he throws the ball too hard, and he can't read defenses, and all of this stuff. And then he has to go to USFL because Tampa Bay doesn't want to pay him. And so it has been a hard road to glory, to quote Arthur Ashe. It's been a hard road to begin to now open up all of these opportunities, particularly on the field. You'd like to see more opportunities opened up in terms of in the coaching ranks. Hey, Pollard would say, we got a lot of work to do. Here I am down here in arguably the most powerful conference in college football in the United States of America. The Southeastern Conference is just expanded. It's basically forced college football to move the needle, to have something many people didn't think they would ever have, and that's a major playoff. You don't have one African-American head football coach of any of these schools. And the majority of these schools are being led by outstanding African-American players. Got to do better. Got to do a lot better. NFL could do better. And one thing that's disappointing is that what you're seeing in the college ranks and what you're seeing in the NFL is African-Americans can be position coaches. They can teach you how to catch the ball. They can teach you how to run the football. They can teach you how to play linebacker. They can teach you how to play DB. But they can't necessarily coordinate your defense or coordinate your offense. And those are the springboards to the head coaching ranks. And so we got to do a lot better job of extending those opportunities. And when you look at what Fritz Pollard was doing, 20 years into the 20th century, And here we're 24 years into the 21st century. I don't want to speak for him, but I think he would unequivocally say we got a lot of work to do, and it can be done. That we got to continue to kind of grind, and those opportunities have got to be extended.
Yeah, it's very, very good statement, Dr. Ross. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with me to talk about a guy who really is a forgotten hero. He truly is.
Yes, he is.
I mean, I can't imagine too many people know about Fritz Pollard.
Well, and that's kind of disappointing. And, you'd like to see, something done again, as we talked about, maybe something, on one of these networks, something done as a film, postage stamp, the NFL having some kind of commemorative sticker, some kind of commemorative something in recognition of, when he was in the league, when he was coaching, whatever the case may be. And even at the Hall of Fame game up in Canton, where a lot of this stuff basically geographically for the most part took place. It will be an opportunity. But I think that, I know that the NFL is at a point right now where television is very, very, very important. Yeah. Expanding its tentacles to outside the borders of the United States to see whether or not the game can be grown in Europe, maybe even potentially in South America and other places. And so I think that, hey, that's all fine and good. I understand profits are important, but I'd like to see some history, and particularly when you start talking about a person, like you say, a forgotten hero, and the sacrifices that he made. It'd be great to get some recognition and some knowledge so that individuals have an appreciation that you're putting on this helmet, you're getting this opportunity. And it hasn't always been that easy, whether you're a coach, particularly also if you're somebody playing the quarterback position in the National Football League and you're an African American.
No doubt. Well, I hope my little podcast here helped do a little bit, for Fritz Pollard, and we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. You never know who may see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate you.
I want to thank all of you for joining me on this episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes. When I set out to do this particular podcast, I wasn't quite sure how it would develop. Would it focus on Pollard's strategic approach to the game as a coach? His playing abilities? Something in between? Or would it focus more on the social and cultural impact his position had on the world around him, his life, and his career? Well, I think we know the answer to that. I guess it's still a sports-themed story, as such issues still abound in today's game. Again, thanks to all of you for sticking around, and thanks to Dr. Charles Ross for spending the hour with us, and I'll see you again next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You could be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.